Hey, it's Andrew back here at BTO Range in Conroe, Texas again, and we're going to do a little video on this Crescent Firearms shotgun and some general things to look for and some general things that can go wrong with these old shotguns. We did a video also on the history of Crescent and a little bit of the details of these great old American shotguns from back in the say 1890s up till about 1930. And one of the things we talked about is, with the exception of one model, the Triumph, which was fairly on early on in the Crescent Firearms line, the Crescent Firearms guns were all sidelock shotguns as opposed to boxlock shotguns such as the Stevens guns. And I wanted to illustrate the difference, what makes a sidelock shotgun versus a boxlock shotgun. So I've got an example of each type here. This is a Crescent New Empire, Crescent number 60 New Empire sidelock shotgun. And this is a Browning BSS, which is a boxlock gun. And typically you can tell the difference just with the gun assembled. All of the internals of the hammers, the hammer springs, and all that on a box-lock shotgun are contained within the receiver or the box, as you see on this Browning here. So once we pull the stock off, we would be able to see the hammers and the hammer springs and whatnot mounted and affixed to this one-piece receiver. While on this Crescent gun, and we're about to take the locks out, the locks are independent. There's a right side lock and a left side lock with the hammer and its associated springs and sears and whatnot attached to the lock itself and not the receiver. So it can get a little confusing because some makers of shotguns would put fake side plates on there so it would look like this, but the internals were still inside the receiver. So it would have a fake side plate, if you will, typically engraved and whatnot. And there are Browning BSSs with that side plate on there, but still a box lock shotgun. So there can be a little confusion with that, but basically that's the difference. So I'm going to put this Browning off to the side so we don't mess it up. That's too nice a shotgun to get jacked up somehow. And we'll start working on this New Empire Crescent gun. So this gun is 1929-ish, 28, 29. And it's a 16 gauge New Empire side-by-side shotgun from the Crescent Firearms Company. So the first thing we're going to do is open it up, clear it. We're actually going to remove the barrels and the barrel set, forend and all that. So the lever goes to the right. We open it up. Nothing going on in the bores. We can close it again. And on the New Empire and the Empire shotguns, it is a simple snap-on forend. The older guns, the other Crescent models, have an Anson and Dealey type forend latch, which is a latch, a bar that's inset into the forend with a latch that you pull open, and then you're able to remove the forend from the barrel set. But on this gun, it's a simple snap on and off. Stay. There's a spring-loaded plunger in here. We can remove the forend iron, and we can see what that, we can clean that out if we need to. It's very simple, just these two screws, and then you can remove the wood from the forend iron and have access to the spring and the plunger there to clean it out in the event that it sticks and then it's loose or it's not secured on the barrel set. But this particular forend is nice and secure on the barrel set, so there's no need to really get in there on this gun. So we're going to set this off to the side. Operate the lever, over-rotate the barrels, and you can pull them off. The barrel set's numbered to the receiver. Our extractor moves freely on the gun. And they can be a little bit difficult to get out. I mean, they're contained by a deeply set screw down in here, so it requires a really long, slender screwdriver blade to get in there. And my advice to you is, Use a good penetrating oil such as Croil. Go ahead and put it in there, let it soak. It's not been removed probably in the last 100 years, so it may be seized up in there, and the last thing you want to do is break off a screwdriver bit in that hole way down in there. So we can set this barrel set aside. One thing you want to certainly look at when you're evaluating these older shotguns is the bore condition. And on these late 20s guns, it's not unusual to find really nice bores like these, because they'd pretty much transitioned to smokeless powder by that time. But on earlier guns, or guns that are not fluid steel construction, they're twist stub construction, or what they call Damascus, probably not really Damascus, but called Damascus. A lot of twist barrels and laminated steel barrels were called Damascus at that time. If they have bright, shiny bores, there's a really good possibility that at some point those bores have been honed to get rid of pitting. So it's a good idea to have somebody with the appropriate tools check the barrel wall thickness. And a lot of people just check the barrel wall thickness at the muzzle with a set of calipers, and that's good information to know. But you also need to know the muzzle thickness through here. So if someone's ran in here and honed the pits out, it may be, if it's under about 17 thousandths, 18 thousandths, I'd be really cautious about shooting it at any given point along the tube. You could also check the ribs here to make sure that they haven't come loose. These were silver soldered, not hard soldered at the factory. So although it's looking like these might be a little better solder than what you see on the Belgian guns or even the earlier Crescent guns. So hot bluing these barrel sets is generally a non-starter. We wouldn't do it simply because there's a high possibility that the ribs would separate from the solder failing in the bluing tank. So we would re-rust blue these barrels if it came time to blue them. Nowadays, that's a lost art, really, at a lot of places, and it's cost prohibitive. Rust bluing this barrel set would be a few $100s to make it right. So that obviously is more than what this gun would retail for. So there's a good school of thought that, it might be a candidate for Cerakote if that's what somebody wanted to do. But to me, Cerakote on a gun from the 1920s just kind of looks weird, but it is what it is. So we'll set those aside. We don't need to mess much more with them. So on the receiver set, to remove these locks, there are 3 screws. This screw right here goes all the way through and it pins the locks together. It screws the locks together here. You have a screw here and then a screw here that holds the front of the locks in. And then each lock has a shelf that dovetails into a recess in this receiver mortise right here. So to pull these locks, we're going to pull these 3 screws. So I believe we're going to be okay right here. And remember, on these old guns, sometimes you run into, especially guns where you see a bunch of rust visible, then you may have problems. And if we were to have problems with the screw on the back side where the screw threads were, we would put some Croil, K-R-O-I-L, Croil, in there it's a penetrating oil to get down to here in those threads and then try to back it out. It'd be difficult to put heat on this to back it out, but typically the penetrating oil will get it done. We'll set that off to the side, and then we'll come here, we'll pull this screw, and then its opposing number on this side. We'll pull this screw here. There we go. These screws are interchangeable from left to right. So now, how do you get the locks out? I've seen a couple of videos of people pulling side locks by reaching in with a, I mean, you don't want to, and I've seen it done even on YouTube videos, but someone will reach in with a screwdriver blade, a thin screwdriver blade, and just pry it open. And of course, that's going to damage, potentially damage the wood here at the inletting. Why do that? Or they'll reach in with a punch here and try to pry it out here and potentially damage the screws. I don't see the point in that, when all you have to do is take the screw here, not screw it in, give it a good pop. And now we're pretty close to getting that out. Without damaging the wood or the threads on the screw. So now, to get this other side out, we're going to have to go in with a punch, and we may be able to do it here. A lot of times you have to go in with a punch and tap the lock out from the inside. And I don't think I brought a punch. Not our primary bent, so I'm kind of making do here, which is everything I tell people not to do is kind of what I'm doing right now, so don't be like me, I guess is my point. But now we can bring the locks out, right? So we'll get to the locks in just a second. When we look in here, we can see the firing pins right here, and you can see that they are both intact and in good shape. If we wanted to replace these firing pins, because they do have some peening here just from being struck by the hammer, used firing pins are available from cannibalized guns, and they're pretty readily available, and it's pretty easy to tell visibly whether the pin you're buying is better than the pin you've got, or they can be remade by somebody with a small bitch top lathe if it's that important. But those are held in place by these screws right here. So we would pull this screw out and then bring the firing pin out to the rear to pull those out. Let's set this aside a minute and take a look at these locks. The new Empire and the Empire are their own set of locks, different from the other Crescent locks of the previous models of Crescent. This particular hammer spring, notice the hammers are cocked. I should have mentioned this before. When you go to take the locks off, it's a lot easier to do it if the hammers are in the cocked position. So you have to clear the gun anyway. So when you open the gun to clear it, close the gun to take the barrel set off. Don't pull the triggers to put the hammers in the fired position, otherwise you'll have to struggle with the locks a little bit more. So it's easier to do it with the hammers in the cocked position. So if we were to take this apart any further, we would pull these two screws and pull this plate off the locks. We could compress the hammer spring and pull that out. So these hammer springs are very robust, heavy springs, and they are being remade, or they can be made by a gunsmith that knows how to properly temper springs. So, but what needs to be replaced most often on these guns is this sear, this bar here at the bottom. And we can see right here the interface between the sear and the hammer notch on this shotgun. So if the gun is failing to cock a barrel, then this is typically what the problem is. This has chipped out, or there's some problem here, and either the hammer or the sear, or both, have to be replaced. And that is where we can run into some problems, because they don't, all the Crescent guns don't interchange. A lot of them do, but some of them do not. So you have to kind of figure out which model you have and whether those parts are available. In a pinch, we would TIG weld up whichever part is chipped out and then recut it. Now bear in mind, That's not cheap either anymore. It'd be a little bit of money to do that and to make it work right. So it would depend on whether, and then it's the customer's decision, right, as to whether that gun is now relegated as a wall hanger and a conversation piece, or whether they want to spend the money to make it a shooter again. And more times than not, I suggest to the customer to not do it. It's probably great granddad's old shotgun, so there's a lot of sentimental value. Absolutely 100%. The sentimental value still exists if it's in the gun rack as opposed to shooting it. But I mean, by all means, we would certainly do it. And we'd rather do it than somebody that's not really familiar with how these guns or how these shotguns operate. We'd rather do it to make sure it's done right. So anyway, that's just a rant for another day, I guess. So these locks, and you can see that the locks are also numbered. So they're also numbered too. So you should have an all matching gun. The locks match the serial number here, the serial number here, and the serial number here all match. So that's obviously what you want to see. So it doesn't mean if you have locks from a different new Empire that the gun wouldn't work. They probably will, but these, even at an inexpensive price point, what these guns always were, even back in the 20s, that was their marketing niche, was a inexpensive, good quality gun for the average person that needed a shotgun. But these were all hand fit. The locks were hand fit to the receiver. So there weren't any CNC machines back then. So they were based on the machinery they had, and then somebody fitted them individually to the receiver. So if you were to get another complete lock or another lock plate, may or may not work, or may or may not look correct on the shotgun that you've got. So these locks can be cleaned as they are, and they're designed to be taken apart to this degree by the end user when they were made. Crescent figured that they would be dismounted to this level so that people could clean them and then put them back together. So that's perfectly fine to do that. No real need to take these apart unless you have to replace a sear or that hammer spring. So the top lever on this gun, manipulating the top lever, watch that safety button, that's in the fire position. So manipulating the top button is supposed to bring this back to the safe position. That's an automatic feature on this gun. To pull this gun apart further, to get into there, we would pull this screw, simple wood screw in there. So we should be able to flex that out, then flex it around 90 degrees, and then pull this out completely. See, it's got a little ledge here that fits in this hole, and then it rotates into place and screws down. So now we can actually remove the bottom plate by pulling this screw and this screw. So that screw goes all the way up into that hole right there, and that's the primary screw that holds that stock in place. And this screw is a real short screw that just indexes that trigger plate at the front. So I'm trying to keep, I don't know, I just have a thing about keeping the screws with the parts that they came with. Okay, so now we have this plunger right here is the plunger that when the cocking or the trip lever is moved, we see this little pin right here moving backwards. That pushes against this rod, and that's what pushes that safety button to the rear. It impacts here and pushes that safety button to the rear. This here moves forward and actually blocks the triggers from being pulled. This is the actual safety. The safety button is still mounted up here. retained here by this detent spring, and that's the exact same system that's used in the Stevens guns and the Savage 311, Stevens 311, much later on in the 20th century. And we talk about that kind of in the video on the Crescent guns. We talk about their interaction. They were bought by Stevens about 1930 or 31. So one thing to look out for if you're down this deep anyway, it's a good idea to just take a look at the inletting of this stock. It is really thin. It's got a lot of the same problems that the LC Smith shotgun has, and that they tend to crack out through here. But this stock is nice and solid. I'm super happy about that. Now, one thing is, and we see this on the Stevens guns, the 311s, people don't want the safety to engage automatically when the top lever is maneuvered, and that's done by shortening their version of this rod right here, and that can be shortened. On the Crescent guns, this rod can just be removed, and then it won't move the safety button at all, and the safety will still be functional. So if someone wants to remove that on the Crescent gun, you can. It doesn't really hurt anything. You just have to remember to take the safety off if you're in the middle of a bunch of birds and you reload, I guess, is what the thing is. And what's going on with those guys and we see that people want to do that a lot on their over and under guns because they're shooting clays or they're shooting some shooting sport where they are trying to get that reload and back on target as quickly as possible. So we're happy with this stock. We're not cracked out. We're not chipped out. Man, they'll break out through here pretty easily. So this is a very solid old stock. I'm real happy about that. So here are our firing pins. And you see them kind of squeaking out right here. And they're pretty heavily peened on the back side just from years of the hammers hitting them. It's not causing them any problems. It can peen out enough to where it starts rubbing in this cutout area where the firing pin goes back and forth. If it's peened out enough to where they are actually rubbing, you can actually pull the firing pin without replacing it. Pull the firing pin, just turn down that peened area and put it back in. So I wouldn't worry about it just a whole big heck of a lot. As long as the gun is still firing, you have good firing pin protrusion, I wouldn't worry about moving that out so much. So we have the cocking levers here, and it's a really simple receiver compared to some other things. It's really easy to work on compared to even a box lock gun like the Stevens 311 where the springs are in a really deep blind hole and they're really stout and hard to do with. So the trip lever, this is your trip lever, comes all the way through and is actuated by this spring here. And it's a really stout spring. You can see that even after 100 years, there's plenty of tension on that trip lever, on that top lever spring. So you wouldn't necessarily have to, that's not really a replacement part. You see a whole big ton. To remove the top lever, you pull this screw and you can bring the top lever out. You got a lot of stuff moving on in here. You've got this pin that pushes that rod we talked about, and then you have the this spring that powers that gives that top lever the power to lock in. So now that said, you can see right through here, this little shelf right here is what moves in and locks the barrels into the locked position. So when that trip lever is closed, that what you saw moving just there goes in between here. So if you get a gun that has a lot of wobble to and fro like here, it's simply from where either on that top lever or here. Again, that's not being remade. If you replace the top lever, it may not have it may not be any better than the lever you're taking out. The wear might be here. So this is one of those cases where it was something that absolutely someone was 100%, we have to fix this, I have to shoot this shotgun. Then we would actually take that up and recut it to where it locks up better. Again, major surgery on the gun, expensive. It'd be unusual to take a Crescent shotgun apart this far, unless you just wanted to detail clean it, or unless you wanted to deal with These small wire springs, for example, that is a replacement part on these guns. That can be had. There's one spring in here, it can be hard to see, that is giving us the return on these triggers. So, and you can also see that this trigger plate is also serial numbered to the rest of the gun as well. So they did, even for an inexpensive gun, and then the trigger guard itself. So all these parts that were fitted to this receiver are serial numbered to that receiver. So even for an inexpensive gun back in the day, they took that level of care to make sure that everything stayed together during the assembly process. So that's the take apart on a Crescent New Empire. It generally is the same for any of the Crescent Sidelock shotguns. There's some difference in how some of the parts, the geometry of some of the parts, but the overall theory of how the gun works and how the gun is taken apart is all the same. So if you like what we're doing, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell. We've got some more interesting stuff coming up down the pike. We try to post stuff like this every week when we can. Drop us a comment. We read them. And if there's something that you'd like us to focus on, we'll certainly give that the shot if we get the opportunity. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.